This is my favorite brain presentation. I chose to talk about the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is located right behind the forehead. It is on the anterior side of the human body. It controls thinking, judgment, movement, memory, social skills, and language, among other things. It is the largest of the four main lobes of the brain, and it is fully developed around the age of 25. It still develops through mid-20s, meaning changes can still occur, though. What makes this part of the brain so interesting is the amount of functions that it has and its impact on how and why the way that we react to things and communicate certain ways. It controls all of that. This image looks at the anatomy of the frontal lobe. There are three cortexes that make up the frontal lobe, which is the motor cortex, which executes movement, the premotor cortex, which plans movement, the prefrontal cortex, which controls emotions, and it also includes Broca's area, which controls speech production and articulation. The second picture on the right-hand side is an MRI scan highlighting the frontal lobe, and you can clearly see that it is the largest lobe. There are many functions, like I said, of the frontal lobe. It manages thinking, emotions, personality, impulse control, judgment, voluntary movements, and memory. It also handles learning and recalling information and retrieving information for later use, whether that's memories or information that we have learned. It also handles executive functions such as attention span. By voluntary movements, when I say if it controls that, I mean movements such as moving your arm up and down. Another thing that the frontal lobe does is controls social understanding. So basically what you should and should not do in a social situation. For example, in one show that I watched, there was this patient who had a frontal lobe tumor, and it caused him to say everything that he thought out loud, and he doesn't realize that it was wrong, and he would have to ask his sister, who was his caretaker, if what he said was wrong, because due to his tumor in his frontal lobe, he had no way to detect what was right or wrong. Basically, the frontal lobe regulates everything, so damage to this area could seriously alter a person's personality and their behavior. It is basically the control center of our behavior. Let's talk about damage to the frontal lobe. This is the most common region for TBIs to occur due to its location. Damage to the frontal lobe can lead to difficulty controlling emotions such as anger and aggression. The damage can be either temporary or permanent. It depends on the severity of it. At the Cleveland Clinic, there was this guy who suffered a TBI. Prior to his injury, he was described as a calm, respected leader, but after his traumatic brain injury, he became irritable, rude, and profane, and showed a decrease in impulse control. It can cause serious behavior changes. Some common conditions that affect the frontal lobe include Broca's aphasia, Alzheimer's, ADHD, autism, brain lesions caused by diseases or damage from surgery or procedures, brain tumors, anxiety, personality disorders, Lewy body dementia, seizures, stroke, and traumatic brain injury, like we just discussed. Broca's aphasia is a condition involving the frontal lobe and Broca's area. Broca's area specifically controls motor control of speech and production of language. Basically, what happens is you know what you want to say, but you can't say it when you have Broca's aphasia. The most common cause is a stroke. Having Broca's aphasia can impact behavior because people who have this can't properly express themselves, which can cause them to lash out with anger, aggression, and they become very frustrated. Some cases, you'll need a frontal lobectomy. This is when they would remove a part of your frontal lobe. It is used to treat frontal lobe epilepsy or even brain tumors. Basically, like I said, you would cut away a portion of the frontal lobe where the seizure occurs or the tumor is, and this would help get rid of that. There are some negative side effects, though, such as personality changes, problems with impulse control, mood, motivation, attention, and a decrease in socialization. An example of a personality change was I read about this one person who had a glioblastoma, and he had a frontal lobectomy. And prior to having this procedure, he was loving, kind, family-oriented, but after he was very mean and made very nasty comments to everybody, including his family, and wanted nothing to do with his family, and he was very unhappy. They had to go back in, and they realized they messed up some of the parts of his frontal lobe, They were able to reverse it, but this is an example of how extreme that the personality could change. This CT scan shows a picture of your brain before and after a lobectomy, and you can clearly see in image D where the part of the lobe was resected, and you can see in A right where that big tumor was, and then where they started resecting around that tumor. This concludes the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening.